what would you say is something that was the most memorable to you? What would you say was the best thing that you did while you were there?
Probably the most memorable was landing. We were 6 hours late landing, and
In April 1972, while the world watched in awe, Charles Duke stepped onto the moon during the Apollo 16 mission. For quite some time, he explored a silent, dusty world where no life had ever existed. But unlike so many mysteries tied to space, those times were never lost, hidden, or erased.
I don't recall any other problems we had except deployment of the Apollo lunar surface experiments package. And he got tangled up in an accident, tangled up to one of the cables, so we lost that.
Every step, every word, and every discovery was carefully recorded. So what really happened during Charles Duke's time on the moon? And why do some people still question it today? Join us in this video as we dig deep and reveal the details. Number 10. The things Charles Duke could never fully explain. For decades, the moon has been more than rock and dust in the minds of space lovers and conspiracy theorists. Stories of strange lights and silent watchers have always followed the Apollo missions. But when Charles Duke, one of NASA's most respected astronauts, began reflecting more openly on what he experienced during Apollo 16, old questions came back to life. Apollo 16 was never meant to chase mysteries. The mission focused on exploring the lunar highlands, a rough and ancient region covered in deep craters, sharp ridges, and scattered rock formations older than almost anything on Earth. Duke and Commander John Young spent nearly 3 full days on the surface. They drove the lunar rover across the gray landscape, collected rock samples, planted experiments, and followed a strict scientific schedule. Everything was documented. Every word was recorded. But later in life, Duke suggested that not everything they saw fit neatly into NASA's reports. He spoke about unusual glows along the horizon. At times, he noticed strange reflections that did not match the angle of the sun or the position of their equipment. There were moments when radio interference appeared at the same time as faint flashes of light in the distance. During the mission, these incidents were logged as instrument anomalies or simple optical effects, practical explanations, nothing more. Yet as the years passed, Duke hinted that he was not completely satisfied with those labels. In interviews and public talks, he occasionally used words that caught people's attention. He described feeling a kind of presence on the moon, not a creature, not a spaceship, but something harder to define. He said that while standing in the silence of the lunar highlands, he sometimes felt as if they were being observed. According to Duke, there was a strange sense that the place was aware. Not alive in the way we understand life, but not entirely empty either. He once recalled seeing what looked like a thin line of light moving slowly along a distant ridge. It pulsed softly, then faded away. It wasn't sunlight, and it wasn't our reflection, he said. It was something else. He never claimed it was proof of extraterrestrial life. He never announced a hidden discovery. But he made it clear that some moments on the moon did not have simple answers. And for a mission that was recorded down to the smallest detail, that lingering mystery is what continues to fascinate people today. But aside from Charles Duke, how many others spent time on the moon? Keep watching to find out. Number 9. The first step that opened the moon. Long before Charles Duke ever set foot on the lunar surface, another historic moment changed everything. On July 20th, 1969, during Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong climbed down a small ladder and placed his boot onto the moon. The world held its breath. Millions watched on flickering television screens as he said the words that would echo through history. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It was more than a sentence. It was proof. At that moment, the moon stopped being a distant light in the night sky and became a place humans could reach. Armstrong's step was not just a personal achievement. It carried the weight of years of hard work, failed tests, political pressure, and human risk. It showed that with enough determination, even the most impossible goal could become real. That single step reshaped how humanity saw itself. Space was no longer untouchable. The success of Apollo 11 proved that astronauts could travel nearly 240,000 miles, land on another world, and return safely. It built confidence inside NASA and across the scientific community. Engineers refined spacecraft designs. Scientists began planning longer stays and deeper studies of the lunar surface. Without Apollo 11, there would have been no Apollo 16. Missions like the one Charles Duke joined were possible because Armstrong and his team proved it could be done. Each mission built on the last, expanding our knowledge of the moon's soil, rocks, gravity, and history. The landing also sparked something powerful back on Earth. Children watched and dreamed. Universities saw a rise in students wanting to study science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Innovation accelerated. The moon landing became a symbol of human perseverance, a reminder that limits are often temporary. And as later astronauts stood on the same silent ground, including Charles Duke, they did so knowing they were walking in the footsteps of a moment that changed the course of exploration forever. But what about the man who followed Armstrong? Let's find out. Number 8. The second man on the moon. As Neil Armstrong finished speaking those historic words during Apollo 11, another astronaut was preparing for his own unforgettable moment. Inside the lunar module, Buzz Aldrin waited for his turn. You can almost picture the feeling, the quiet focus, the rush of adrenaline, the awareness that history was unfolding in real time. When Aldrin carefully climbed down the ladder and stepped onto the surface, he became the second human being to walk on the moon. It was a position that history would always remember. But for Aldrin, the moment was not about rankings. It was about where he was standing, on a world no human had ever touched before. He later described the landscape with words that still capture the imagination: magnificent desolation. The moon stretched around him in silence, covered in gray dust and sharp shadows. There were no sounds of wind, no moving water, no signs of life. Just a wide, open stillness. Compared to the busy, colorful Earth he had left behind, the moon felt empty and ancient. Yet Aldrin did not simply stand still and admire the view. Once on the surface, he began testing how his body moved in the moon's low gravity. He tried small hops, longer strides, and playful bounding steps, which he jokingly called his lunar Olympics. These movements were not just for fun. They helped NASA understand how astronauts could balance, carry equipment, and work efficiently in a place where gravity was only a fraction of Earth's. His actions proved something important. Humans were not just visitors who could plant a flag and leave. They could adapt. They could function. They could explore. Aldrin's time on the moon became more than a personal milestone. It showed that exploration was not a one-person achievement. It was a shared effort built on teamwork, preparation, and courage. His reflections over the years have continued to inspire scientists, engineers, and dreamers alike. When you think about Buzz Aldrin's moonwalk, it represents more than a second step. It symbolizes humanity's deep curiosity, the need to understand what lies beyond the horizon. And that same spirit of curiosity would later guide astronauts like Charles Duke as they spent longer days exploring the silent surface, pushing even further into the unknown. Beyond Apollo 11, another mission carried hidden moments. Number 7. The photo that was never taken. While missions like Apollo 11 made history, the mission of Apollo 12 proved that landing on the moon was not a one-time success. In November 1969, Alan Bean served as the lunar module pilot alongside Commander Pete Conrad. Their target was the Ocean of Storms, a dark lunar plain that waited 250,000 miles from Earth. But their journey almost ended just seconds after it began. Only 36 seconds after launch, lightning struck their spacecraft. Warning lights flashed. Telemetry data dropped out. For a moment, it looked like the mission might be lost. Then, Mission Control sent a calm but strange instruction. Flight, try SCE to AUX. It was engineer John Aaron's quick thinking. Bean recognized the command and flipped the correct switch, restoring the spacecraft's systems. That single action saved Apollo 12. Days later, Bean and Conrad stood on the moon. They explored the surface, deployed scientific experiments, and installed the first nuclear power generator station on the moon to provide electricity for their equipment. Meanwhile, Dick Gordon remained in lunar orbit, photographing potential landing sites for future missions. Bean also had a personal plan. Near the robotic spacecraft Surveyor 3, he hoped to take a special photograph. He had packed a self-timer for his Hasselblad camera so he and Conrad could appear together in a single image. It would have been one of the only photos showing both moonwalkers at once. Secretly, Bean also liked the idea of confusing scientists back home about how the photo was taken. But when they reached the site, the timer was nowhere to be found. They searched through their tool carrier bag, dust floating around them in slow motion. But time was running out. The opportunity slipped away. Later, after the EVA had ended and it was too late, Bean found the timer. Frustrated, he threw it as far as he could across the lunar surface. The famous photo was never taken. Years later, Bean turned to painting. He created artwork imagining the picture they never captured, including pieces titled "The Fabulous Photo We Never Took" and "Our Little Secret." Through art, he recreated the moment that slipped through his fingers on the moon. Today, his actual spacesuit stands on display at the National Air and Space Museum, a reminder of a mission that survived lightning, made history, and left behind one small mystery: a photograph that exists only in memory and paint. One missed photo, yet another life-changing lunar moment awaited. What came next? Stay tuned to find out. Number 6. The moonwalk that changed a man's mind. For Edgar Mitchell, walking on the moon during Apollo 14 was not only a scientific achievement, it became something deeply personal. While the mission focused on exploration, experiments, and collecting lunar samples, Mitchell experienced a moment that would reshape the rest of his life. As he traveled back from the moon and looked at Earth floating in the darkness of space, he felt what he later described as an epiphany. Seeing the planet from that distance changed his perspective. Earth did not look divided by borders or conflicts. It appeared whole, bright, and fragile against the vast black background of the universe. Mitchell said that, in that quiet moment, he felt a powerful sense of connection, not just to Earth, but to everything. He later called this feeling cosmic consciousness. To him, it meant that all life is linked together, and that the universe is far more mysterious and unified than we usually imagine. When he returned home, Mitchell did not leave that experience behind. Instead of focusing only on traditional science, he began exploring the nature of human awareness and consciousness. He founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, an organization created to study the connection between science and spirituality. He believed that understanding the human mind was just as important as understanding the stars. His ideas surprised many people. Some admired his openness. Others questioned his direction. But Mitchell remained firm in his belief that space exploration had shown him something deeper about existence. He encouraged people to think beyond material achievements and to ask larger questions about meaning and purpose. Mitchell's story shows that walking on the moon does not only leave footprints in dust. Sometimes it leaves lasting changes inside a person. His experience reminds us that exploration can lead to unexpected discoveries, not only about distant worlds, but about ourselves and our place in the cosmos. Number 5. The quiet commander who pushed every limit. The story of the Apollo era would not be complete without John Young. Calm, focused, and deeply skilled, Young became one of the most experienced astronauts of his time. His career reflected the courage and innovation that defined America's race to explore space. Young first made history on Gemini 3, the program's first manned flight. That mission proved astronauts could control and maneuver spacecraft in orbit, a critical step toward reaching the moon. Flying in both the Gemini and Apollo programs showed his versatility and steady confidence under pressure. But it was his leadership of Apollo 16 that secured his place in history. As commander, Young guided the spacecraft safely to the lunar highlands. Alongside Charles Duke, he spent nearly 3 days exploring the moon's rugged surface. They drove the lunar rover across rocky terrain, gathered samples, and carried out experiments that deepened our understanding of the moon's ancient history. Young's achievements did not stop there. He became the first astronaut to fly 6 space missions, including 2 journeys to the moon. Later, he commanded the first space shuttle mission aboard STS-1, piloting Space Shuttle Columbia on its maiden voyage. That flight marked the beginning of a new era in reusable spacecraft. Throughout his career, Young was known for his fearless problem-solving and sharp technical mind. He approached every mission with discipline and determination, helping expand the limits of what humans could achieve beyond Earth. When you look back at his long journey through space, it becomes clear that John Young was more than just an astronaut. He was a steady force behind some of the most important milestones in space history, a true pioneer in humanity's ongoing quest to explore the unknown. Keep watching to find out about the crazy stories of others who spent time on the moon. Number 4. The scientist who walked on the moon. Harrison Schmitt, often known as Jack Schmitt, brought something unique to the Apollo program. Born on July 3, 1935, he was not a test pilot or a military aviator like most astronauts of his time. Instead, he was a trained geologist, a university professor, and later a United States Senator from New Mexico. To this day, he remains the only professional scientist and the most recent living person to have walked on the moon without a background in military aviation. In December 1972, Schmitt flew as part of Apollo 17, the final Apollo mission. He became the first member of NASA's scientist-astronaut group to travel into space. When he stepped onto the lunar surface, he became the 12th person and the second youngest to walk on the moon. He was also the second-to-last person to leave its surface, climbing back into the lunar module shortly before Commander Eugene Cernan. Schmidt's presence on Apollo 17 was significant. Unlike the astronauts before him, he was a field geologist by profession. Before his mission, he had already played an important role in supporting the Apollo program. He helped train earlier astronauts in lunar geology, teaching them how to recognize important rock formations and collect valuable samples. When he finally reached the moon himself, his scientific background allowed him to study the surface with a trained eye, adding depth and precision to the mission's discoveries. Schmidt remains the only professional scientist to have traveled beyond low Earth orbit and visited the Moon. After leaving NASA in August 1975, he entered politics. Running as a Republican candidate in 1976, he defeated Democratic incumbent Joseph Montoya and served as a U.S. Senator from New Mexico. In 1982, he lost his re-election bid to Democrat Jeff Bingaman. From scientist to astronaut to senator, Jack Schmidt's journey reflects the wide-reaching impact of the Apollo era, a time when exploration opened doors not only in space, but also in science, leadership, and public service. Yet Apollo's science would soon face its hardest test. What happened next? Let's find out. Number 3. Science, Strain, and the Genesis Rock. When James Irwin was selected by NASA in April 1966 as one of 19 new astronauts, few could have predicted how demanding and historic his journey would become. Early in his career, he was chosen as commander for LTA-8, an environmental qualification test of the Apollo lunar module inside a massive vacuum chamber at the Houston Space Environment Simulation Laboratory. The test pushed the spacecraft to its limits, simulating the harsh emptiness of space. It was careful, technical work, the kind that built confidence long before launch day ever arrived. Irwin later served on the astronaut support crew for Apollo 10, the full dress rehearsal for the first moon landing. After that, he became backup lunar module pilot for Apollo 12, gaining deeper experience with lunar systems and procedures. All of it prepared him for his defining mission, Apollo 15. Between July 26 and August 7, 1971, as Apollo 15's lunar module pilot, Irwin logged 295 hours and 11 minutes in space. His time on the Moon included 18 hours and 35 minutes of extravehicular activity. Commander David Scott also conducted a brief stand-up EVA, opening the hatch to survey the landscape and take photographs. Apollo 15 was different from earlier missions. It was the first of the so-called J missions, designed for longer stays and deeper scientific study. Irwin and Scott received intense geological training before launch. They were expected not just to collect samples, but to think like field scientists. That preparation paid off when they discovered what became known as the Genesis Rock, an ancient lunar sample that offered clues about the Moon's early formation and, by extension, the early history of the solar system. Apollo 15 landed in the Hadley Apennine region, a dramatic landscape of mountains and winding rills. The mission lasted just under 3 days on the surface, 66 hours and 54 minutes. It was also the first mission to carry the lunar roving vehicle. Irwin became the first passenger in a car driven on another world as Scott guided the rover across the dusty terrain. But behind the success, strain was building. After completing their final moonwalk, launching from the surface, and docking with the Command Module Endeavour, Irwin and Scott had been awake for nearly 23 hours. During this intense period, Irwin began experiencing the early symptoms of a heart condition. Flight surgeons monitoring his vital signs from Earth noticed irregular rhythms. His heart had developed bigeminy, a pattern of abnormal beats. Dr. Charles Berry informed mission leadership that if Irwin had been on Earth, he would have been placed in intensive care. Yet in space, the situation was different. Inside the spacecraft, Irwin was breathing 100% oxygen, was under constant monitoring, and was in zero gravity, conditions that reduced strain on his heart. As Berry later explained, in many ways, Irwin was already in the best possible environment for recovery. During the journey home, Irwin rested while Command Module pilot Al Worden performed a deep space EVA to retrieve film from the spacecraft's instrument bay. Irwin assisted by wearing a pressure suit and monitoring the operation. Gradually, his condition stabilized. By splashdown, his heart rhythm had returned to normal. Interestingly, the incident was not discussed in detail during post-mission debriefings, and the condition did not reappear after his return to Earth. James Irwin's Apollo 15 mission stands as one of the most scientifically important of the Apollo era. It combined exploration, discovery, endurance, and quiet personal struggle. From the Genesis rock to the first rover rides across the moon, his time there expanded human knowledge, even as his own body reminded everyone just how demanding space exploration truly is. Number 2. Commander, explorer, and controversial pioneer. David Scott holds a unique place in lunar history. Born on June 6, 1932, Scott would go on to become the 7th person to walk on the moon, and later command Apollo 15, the 4th mission to land humans there. Today, he remains one of the few surviving moonwalkers and the only living commander of a spacecraft that successfully landed on the lunar surface. His first journey into space came in March 1966 as pilot of Gemini 8, alongside Neil Armstrong. The mission nearly ended in tragedy when a stuck thruster caused the spacecraft to spin dangerously out of control. Armstrong regained command and safely executed an emergency abort. Though the mission was cut short at just under 11 hours in orbit, it proved both men could respond calmly under extreme pressure. In March 1969, Scott returned to space as command module pilot of Apollo 9, a critical test of the Apollo spacecraft in Earth orbit. Alongside Commander James McDivitt and lunar module pilot Rusty Schweickart, Scott helped verify that the lunar module could operate independently, a vital step toward future moon landings. After serving as backup commander for Apollo 12, Scott received command of Apollo 15. In July 1971, he and James Irwin descended to the moon's Hadley Apennine region. Their mission marked the first of the extended J missions, allowing longer surface stays and more detailed scientific exploration. Scott and Irwin spent 3 days on the moon, using the lunar roving vehicle to travel farther than any crew before them. During one demonstration on the surface, Scott famously dropped a hammer and a feather together to show that, without air resistance, both fall at the same speed. A simple but powerful lesson in physics broadcast to the world. However, Apollo 15's legacy was not without controversy. After returning to Earth, it was revealed that Scott and his crewmates had carried hundreds of unauthorized postal covers to the moon, intending to use them as souvenirs. NASA viewed the action as a violation of trust. Although no criminal charges followed, the incident damaged their standing within the agency. Scott later served as director of NASA's Dryden Flight Research Center in California before retiring from NASA in 1977. In the years that followed, he remained connected to space exploration, working on research projects and serving as a consultant for films about the space program, including Apollo 13. David Scott's story reflects both the triumphs and complexities of the Apollo era. He was a skilled pilot, a careful commander, and a man who helped expand scientific exploration on the moon, leaving behind footprints that still mark one of humanity's boldest chapters. From controversy and command to one final set of footprints, keep watching to find out more. Number 1. The final steps and the road that led there. Before he became the last man to walk on the moon, Eugene Cernan had already built a path that placed him at the center of Apollo history. He was first selected as the backup lunar module pilot for Apollo 7, even though that mission did not carry a lunar module. In NASA's crew rotation system, backup roles often led to future prime assignments. That rotation moved Cernan into position as the lunar module pilot for Apollo 10, the final full rehearsal before the first moon landing. In May 1969, Cernan and Commander Tom Stafford flew the lunar module Snoopy in lunar orbit. They descended to within 8.5 nautical miles of the moon's surface, performing every step of a landing except the final powered descent. It was a tense and precise mission. Their work gave NASA critical data about the moon's gravity, navigation systems, and landing procedures. Without Apollo 10's rehearsal, Apollo 11's success would have carried far more risk. Apollo 10 also set a record that still stands. During the return to Earth, the spacecraft reached 39,897 kilometers per hour, the highest speed ever achieved by a crewed vehicle. Cernan had already touched the edge of the moon, but he would have to wait to stand on it. Later, he was offered the chance to serve as lunar module pilot on Apollo 16. That role likely would have guaranteed him a moon landing. Instead, Cernan declined. He chose to risk missing out on walking on the moon in order to remain eligible to command his own mission. It was a bold decision. NASA's future missions were uncertain due to budget cuts, and there was no guarantee he would ever get that command. He returned to the crew rotation as backup commander for Apollo 14, placing him in line to command the final scheduled lunar mission, Apollo 17. But even that mission faced change. Apollo 18 and 19 were canceled, and pressure from the scientific community grew to place geologist Harrison Schmitt on the final flight. Originally, Joe Engle had been assigned as lunar module pilot. When NASA replaced Engle with Schmitt in August 1971, Cernan had a choice: accept Schmitt or risk losing the mission entirely. He chose to keep the flight. Over time, Cernan came to respect Schmitt's skills deeply. Though Engle was an outstanding test pilot, Cernan later concluded that Schmitt was an exceptional lunar module pilot and brought valuable scientific expertise to the mission. When Apollo 17 landed in the Taurus-Littrow Valley in December 1972, Cernan finally stood on the moon. Over 3 days, he and Schmitt conducted 3 spacewalks, totaling about 22 hours. Their first EVA alone lasted more than 3 times longer than the combined moonwalk of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on Apollo 11. Using the lunar roving vehicle, they traveled more than 35 kilometers across the valley. They collected a record 110.4 kilograms of lunar samples, more than any previous Apollo crew. Those rocks would help scientists better understand the moon's volcanic past and early formation. Cernan also drove the rover at a top speed of 18 kilometers per hour, earning the unofficial lunar land speed record. But it was not just records that defined the mission. It was the closing of an era. As Cernan prepared to climb the ladder of the lunar module for the final time, he paused. He knew no other mission was scheduled to return. Standing in the gray dust of Taurus-Littrow, he spoke words that remain the last spoken by a human being on the moon's surface. He expressed hope that humanity would return, that America's efforts had shaped mankind's destiny, and that the moon was being left with peace and hope for all mankind. With that, he stepped up the ladder. Cernan holds a rare place in history. He is one of only 3 astronauts, along with Jim Lovell and John Young, to travel to the moon twice. He is one of 12 people to have walked on its surface. He is also the only person to have flown in 2 different Apollo lunar modules in space while undocked from the command module, both times near the moon. By chance, Purdue University became the alma mater of both the first man to walk on the moon, Neil Armstrong, and the last, Eugene Cernan. From the near landing of Apollo 10 to the final departure of Apollo 17, Cernan's journey traced the full arc of the Apollo program, from preparation to triumph to farewell. His final footprints remain undisturbed in the lunar dust, silent reminders of the moment humanity paused its journey outward, but never truly ended it. So, what are your thoughts about Charles Duke's time on the moon and what he shared? Let us know in the comments section below. From the dusty lunar highlands to the quiet corners of Earth, Charles Duke's and other moonwalkers' time on the moon continues to captivate and mystify. Every story, every glimpse of light on the horizon raises questions about what astronauts truly experienced and what the world has never been told. If this journey into the moon's hidden moments fascinated you, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Click the next video to explore more untold stories from space that challenge everything we thought we knew about the final frontier.